Now we will get on to the captains of the infield, the shortstop position, which, the theme of today's episode is definitely like defensive value because
Definitely is,
both
yeah.
positions have tremendous defensive value, and a lot of not a lot of lists can you have like average or below average offensive players on a top 10 list, but catcher and shortstop, there's going to be a couple that are like that. So on so yeah, I'll start with the shortstop since you started with the catchers, and this is this take, it might be a hot take. I don't think it, just based on his numbers last year, I don't think it's really a hot take really at all. But it might be seen as this based on the namesake. But at my number 10, I have Carlos Correa. Um, he's another guy who just had a very weird year last year, and I don't know how much of that has to do with his injury last year, and I don't know if that injury is going to linger on to this year, so I have to be hesitant on him for 2024. But in 2023, for non-2020 seasons, he suffered career lows in average on base percentage, slugging, OPS, BSR, and wins above replacement. The reason why I am having him top 10 is, given his 134 OPS plus the previous 2 years and fairly neutral defense, I think he's due to bounce back a little bit and be a solid shortstop, be like a three win, maybe 4 win season. He could get back to that 6 win status, who knows? But for now, my optimism, albeit is a little bit shaky, I still have some optimism for Carlos Correa and him bouncing back from a below average offensive season, as well as a horrible base running season
Yeah.
and a pretty neutral defensive season. So who do you have as your number 10?
So at number 10, I have another guy that maybe is a surprise given the numbers he put up next year, but I have JP Crawford from the Seattle Mariners. I think results wise, JP Crawford was more than the 10th best catcher in 2023. But this list is supposed to be going into 2024, and a lot of his season just has the feels of we're going to look back at 2023 as JP Crawford's career year. He put up 4.9 FWAR in 638 plate appearances. And he kind of has the sort of Isaac Paredes, Lane Thomas sort of build where he accumulates a lot of stats despite not as good expected numbers, specifically on the slugging side of things, because he hits a lot of fly balls and he pulls the ball a lot. He had a 43.5% pull rate last year, a 23.7% fly ball rate, which is around the league average. But I mean, I think anecdotally, he hit 19 home runs last year after not hitting more than double digits at any other year of his career, I believe, which was dope. And I think that was kind of just, he pulled a bunch of fly balls and found his way into it because, I mean, he only had a 16th percentile barrel rate last year, only 4.8%, 3.1 barrels per plate appearances. He also was very shaky on defense. He had -8 outs above average, which is to be honest, kind of on par with where he's been for a lot of his career. It's actually a slight improvement over 2022. And Fangraphs kind of agreed he was a negative defensive runs average, above average rather, which is really not a good look at the shortstop position because it is a position where it is a little bit easier to accumulate defensive runs above average. So it feels like he's a bit due for regression offensively. The defense is a bit shaky, but he does walk at an incredible rate. He's very good with swing decisions. Yeah, I mean, he's elite with swing decisions. 95th percentile chase rate, 86th percentile whiff rate, and only a 19.6% strikeout rate. All of those very good. And again, a 14.7% walk rate is elite. So there are a lot of things JP Crawford does well, but there is, I think, some reason for skepticism as well.
Right. So now on to my number 9, which is Willy Adames, who I kind of prefaced before earlier in the show talking about the Brewers lineup. Willy Adames is an interesting player. Over the last 2 seasons, he has a 103 OPS plus and the second most defensive runs above average and 7th most FWAR among shortstops. He had a 95 OPS plus last year, which is obviously 5% below league average. but he's due to have just better offensive results. He had the fifth unluckiest difference in batting average and expected batting average out of 129, and the seventh unluckiest WOBA and expected WOBA difference. So I could see him easily being an above average bat once again, while being a pretty like gold glove quality defender. I mean, second most defensive runs above average over the last 2 seasons is nothing to scoff at all. And I was very close to putting him number 8, but just for whatever reason, I think just put him number 9. And yeah, I think there's a lot of I think there's some optimism to be had with Willy Adames, who's kind of had a little bit of a career renaissance since going to the Brewers. Who do you have as your number 9?
We're actually doubling up here. I also put Willy Adames as my number 9 shortstop, so we agree on that. Yeah, I mean, Willy Adames is an elite defensive shortstop. Over, he has about like what 30, close to like 25, actually 25 to 30 defensive runs above average over the last 2 seasons. And yeah, he's been an average offensive bat. He was slightly below average last year, and his expected numbers do suggest he's due for a little bit better. His expected batting average was 23 points lower than his actual batting average, or 23 points higher, excuse me, than his actual batting average. His expected slugging was 29 points higher than his actual slugging. So, there is potential that he can get back to being an average offensive bat, maybe even slightly above average. Uh, but there are some things that I don't like about Willy Adames last year, and one of them, the most of which, was that uh, his average exit velocity dipped by 1.5 miles an hour. And I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but over the course of 400 batted balls, which he has pretty much in each of the last 2 seasons, that's not a very good thing. An 87.4% exit velocity is not good for somebody who has a 31.5% fly ball rate. You will find your way into 24 home runs like he did last year. Um, but, in terms of rate stats, it's only going to hurt you. That's a large part of the reason his OPS has dropped over 100 points between 2021 and 2023, where he instead had an 89.5 uh, average exit velocity compared to 87.4. So that 2 miles an hour, that makes a 100, essentially a 100 OPS difference. Um, so I mean, I like the batted ball profile, but I don't like it with that exit velocity combination. And that is actually a case where you either need to hit the ball on the ground a tiny bit more, or really just hit line drives, because a 22.3% line drive rate is something that I would like to see go up from Willy Adames. I'd like to see him definitely above the league average at least, but I would like to see it in like the 26 to 27 range, if that's how hard he's going to be hitting the ball. But he's an elite defender, so I do have him at number 9.
Yeah, Willy Adames, shout out, getting some top 10 recognition. Number 8, I have JP Crawford. Yeah, interesting player to look at because last year definitely seems like a weird outline season in a positive direction. Yeah, he had an offensive just an offensive renaissance last year. From 2022 to 2023, he increased his average exit velocity from 85.1 miles per hour to 88.3 miles per hour. 3.2 mile per hour difference in 1 year is pretty astounding. He also increased his fly ball rate from 18% to 24%, his pull rate from 34% to 43%, and he decreased his ground ball rate from 47% to 40%. That was all while leading the American League in walks, which is pretty astounding. You mentioned that walk rate, it's over 14%, which is really, really good. And his OPS plus, which is, the on the surface non-expected number, that jumped from 100, which is an average hitter, to 131, which is 31% above average. And that resulted in him being 5th among MLB shortstops in F4 last year and 2nd in offensive runs above average. So yeah, the reason I don't have him higher is I need to see him do that again in order to be, that top 6, top 5 status, where where he was last year, 5th most F4 among MLB shortstops last year. So if he does that again, he rises up the list. But that does seem, these numbers do seem very weird, and we could be seeing this as a that player who had that one season. If he could be in part 2 that
Yep.
of that draft. So who knows? But overall, just like looking at everything underlying and on the surface, just went up last year for him last year. and I think he's heading into his age 29 season, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, it seems like good things could be ahead for JP Crawford in the middle or at the top of that Mariners lineup. Who do you have number 8?
Yeah, so we agreed on number 9 and we swapped our 8s and 10s because I have Carlos Correa in my 8. And yeah, I mean, what a wretched season it was for him. A negative 9.2 BSR, a 96 weighted runs created plus, a sub 400 slugging percentage. Uh, yeah, I mean, only a 1.1 F4. It was really, really bad. It was just not a good season for Carlos Correa. But he did keep right around the same batted ball profile. He did. I mean, other than the fact that his ground ball rate and fly ball rate swapped 4% each. That's definitely not a great thing. But he kept the same exit velocity. Um, he did decrease a few things there, but I mean, I still think it is only one a down year, and I'm still open to the idea that he could rebound and get back to what he used to be, or at least a much closer to that than what he was last year. I also kind of just want to give him the benefit of the doubt of he was coming off of a really crazy offseason personally, and maybe he just like wasn't mentally there. I don't know. It's obviously very hard to say. But I feel like he's going into this year, not having gone through that crazy offseason where he signed with or he agreed to terms with two different teams, had them back out because of health reasons, only to, lose out on 6 years and like $200 million in contract negotiations. And I want to believe that there'll be more of a fresh start coming into this spring training for him. So maybe this pick is more based on vibes than anything else, but I did put him at number 8, and I really am open to the idea that he's going to be a 3 to 4 win player at the very least again next season.
Yeah, sometimes you got to go with the vibes. Sometimes the vibes lead
Mhm.
you in the right direction. Yeah, and with Carlos Correa like that, those base running numbers are a little bit of an outlier because I don't think he's going to ground into 30 double plays again because I don't think he's going to have a 70% ground ball rate with a runner on first and less than 2 outs again because that was crazy how it was 70% in those situations and 40% in all other situations. Like that is something I can't imagine that happens once again. So I think those base running numbers will go up, and also he was a premier hitter before last year, and that could easily get back. He could easily get back to that. Hopefully that foot and ankle are in good shape. So yeah, now on to my number 7, which is where I put Bo Bichette, who I mean one of the best offensive players at this position, and I think some people might have me underrating him a little bit. But over the last 2 seasons, he has a 126 OPS plus, also the 6th most F4 among current shortstops, and the 2nd highest weighted runs created plus. That's just the league adjusted and park adjusted offensive statistic that accounts for a lot of different things. He had the 2nd highest weighted runs created plus among 30 primary shortstops with 800 plus plate appearances over the last 2 seasons. What's a good sign with Bo Bichette is he increased his line drive rate 6.3 percentage points from 2022 to 2023. And out of 81 hitters with 400 plus batted balls in 2023, his line drive rate ranked 2nd behind Luis Arraez, who was the batting title winner in the National League. Also with Bo Bichette, very good underlying offensive numbers as well. He was 88th percentile in expected WOBA and 98th percentile in expected batting average. So yeah, at the plate he's been very, very good. Where I'm a little bit concerned and why I might have him below some of these guys is he's been unfortunately losing speed the last 2 years, just statistically in feet per second, and he's not been stealing as many bases despite the rule changes. He's gone from 25 stolen bases on 26 attempts to 13 stolen bases, and now and this past year 5 stolen bases despite the rule change. So he's not as much of a factor with base running. And not as complete of a player as he was 2 years ago, albeit probably the same hitter. But yeah, who do you have as your number 7?
At number 7, this is where I put Xander Bogaerts. um, who had pretty much by all accounts his worst offensive season since 2017 in 2023 in his first season with the Padres. He had his lowest batting average since then, his lowest on base percentage since then, his lowest slugging since then, and then by association his lowest OPS and also his lowest weighted runs created plus, despite the ballpark change that worked a little more in his favor. He also had his first negative BSR season since 2018. And from a batted ball standpoint, he had his highest ground ball rate since 2015. He had a 49.8% ground ball rate last year, which I don't love. He had his lowest line drive rate since 2016. So there are a lot of places where he kind of regressed offensively last year. Just kind of going uh, by by the basic stuff, right? I mean, his expected batting average was only 252, the lowest it's been again since 2017. He was also, he only had a 27% sweet spot rate, which is like not the hitter that he's been. It's not the hitter that we know Xander Bogaerts to be. We kind of know him to be the guy that hits a lot of flares and a lot of good base hits the opposite way. But he didn't really do that to the same degree in his first year in San Diego. So I do worry that this could maybe be a trend with Xander Bogaerts. I think it's always concerning when you see someone regress in that many categories in just 1 year. He's also, now officially on the wrong side of 30, right? He's going into his age 31 season next year. And by all means, he could bring it back in 2024. But, I think the shortstop is a very strong position. And given what we saw with Xander Bogaerts last year, I think it's fair to say that there are 6 shortstops ahead of him.
Yeah, Xander Bogaerts, I've always found it weird to evaluate him because, he all of a sudden had a defensive renaissance like in the middle of the career, which is very rare. And then, and he just always outperforms his expected numbers. But yeah, he's a very interesting player. My number 6 is Trey Turner, who I was very high on last year. I thought he was a top 5 player in the game. He unfortunately was not. But yeah, I think based on the way he closed out last year, I mean, still a very, very good player. Over the last 2 years, just looking at the long-term scale, he has a 118 OPS plus, the 5th most FWAR among shortstops, and the 2nd most BSR among shortstops. That's base running runs, counts for stolen bases, extra base taken, and just how often you get yourself out on the bases. And part of the reason why his BSR is so high is last season he was 30 for 30 on stolen bases, which is pretty astounding. Along with that, in his final 47 games last year, he hit 331 with a 1069 OPS. However, that was preceded by a pretty, like a 4-month slump from him, which was pretty unfortunate. And his overall hitting production has been going down since 2021. His whiff rate and strikeout rate have increased in both 2022 and 2023, and his average on base percentage, slugging, and OPS have all decreased. So that's why I have him lower than I would have had him, in a 2022 rank or a 2023 rank, just because I think his overall hitting production is going down, albeit still a very good player, which is why I have number 6. Who do you have as your number 6?
At number 6, this is where I put Bo Bichette. You had him in your 7. And I have him in my 6th. And, I think the decline in sprint speed is fair. I think the defense is also a fair point because it's not perfect. But I think batted ball wise, he might have had his best season, or at least his best full season in his career. He had a 312 expected batting average, which is a full season high, actually just a career high in general for him, which is 98th percentile, just to give you an idea of what that is. I think it's very easy to see Bo Bichette and think of high batting average, high line drives, and whatnot. But he put up a 504 expected slugging last year. That's 90th percentile. And he, more importantly, had a 30% line drive rate, which was up over 6% from 2022. Which, if you're a guy like Bo Bichette, you want to just hit as many line drives as possible. Kind of like what I said with Willy Adames earlier. This is what you want to be as a hitter if you're not going to have the most power. And Bo Bichette, probably not the most powerful guy in the field, especially on the Blue Jays, but he maximized his potential. I think with this batted ball profile, maybe he could have used a couple extra fly balls and a couple less ground balls. But other than that, I think he has a really good offensive profile. I think he fits what he should be doing. The only thing he could do is chase a little less, walk a lot more, and then the defense and base running are not the best, sure, but I think he's very good at offense and he does what he should be doing.
Right. So yeah, just one spot off with us. My number five is Xander Bogaerts. A lot of it is simply like track record. He's been very consistently, at least a 4-win player, at times a 6-win player, or at least around there. With Xander Bogaerts, he has a 125 OPS plus and the third most F4 among shortstops over the last 2 years, which is very, very good, being top three in F4 at the position over a 2-year span. And why I don't have him in that top three is because his average exit velocity, barrel rate, and slugging have been consistently dropping. His power numbers are just overall down, which just brings down his general offense production. However, he is one of those players, one of those really rare players that can consistently outperform his expected numbers. His expected numbers were actually pretty bad last year, but he was still able to put up a 120 OPS plus. He just, I don't know what it is about him. I don't know if he plans on doing this, but he just seems to do pretty well on ground balls, and maybe just placing them or just finding a way to get infield hits as a guy who isn't necessarily known for his speed, not slow, but not known for his speed. As he is tied for the most hits with a projected distance of 4 feet or fewer over the last 2 years. Usually that would be reserved for the Corbin Carrolls, Trey Turner, Bobby Witt Jr., John Birdie types. But Xander Bogaerts is that guy who just hits the ball very, very at a very, very short distance, but is able to get hits out of them for whatever reason. Also, an interesting thing about Xander Bogaerts is, at least outs above average wise, he proved last year he is a positive defender. He was consistently a negative defender with the Red Sox, but in his contract year, he improved his defense pretty dramatically. And I thought maybe that could have been an outline season, but at least according to outs above average, he was still a positive defender with the Padres. So, yeah, overall, that track record and that defensive improvement keeps him in the top five for me. Who do you have as your number five shortstop?
Yeah, number five. This is where I put Trey Turner. You put him as your number six. We were one spot off on both Trey Turner and on who was the guy that I just put at six that I
Bo
just mentioned?
Bichette.
Oh, Bichette, thank you. Yeah, I think if we did this list last year, we would have probably both put Trey Turner in the one for shortstops, but he did regress quite heavily last season, and we now have him. You have him in your six. I have him in my five. Base running wise, he is very much still there. He hasn't gone anywhere, and he's approaching 50 career BSR, which he's likely going to hit at age 31, which is pretty impressive. Defensively, he did regress quite some last year. He became around a league average defender, according to Fangraphs, below average on Baseball Savant. I still think he did a lot of things well last year. He has a fine enough average exit velocity. He's like a little bit above average, and he hit a lot more fly balls last year. Maybe he is a guy that should be hitting more ground balls. Oddly enough, it's hard to say that about people, but for a guy that hit a lot more fly balls, he also hit a lot more balls straight away. That's not a good combo, like I mentioned earlier. He went from having a 41.4% pull rate in 2022 to a 35.9% pull rate in 2023, and his straight away percentage went from 34.7% to 40.6%. So certainly, there's a lot to be desired in his batted ball placement to go along with his batted ball profile. But I still think he's very good. I mean, he's stayed right around where he was in 2022 in terms of expected slugging, expected batting average, hard hit rate, exit velocity, walk rate. His strikeout rate did go up a couple points, but overall he's still there in a lot of components, and I think he finished strong last year, like you mentioned, and I feel like he can use that as momentum going into 2024 because I mean, there is kind of a stigma around your first year playing in a large market like Philadelphia, under a big contract. And, I think he was feeling that for some time. But after the, very famously after that standing ovation, he brought it back. So I'm pretty optimistic that Trey Turner can sort of bring it back next year.
Yeah, really, really appreciated the Philadelphia fan base. It helped me out a tremendous bit.
Yeah,
That's the
they
legendary.
got it. They got to get a ring.
Yeah, they it's not the ring they were looking for, but they will get a ring. My so now on to my number four. Some people may have him ranked higher based on what he did last year. Some people may have him ranked lower because it was just one season. But I have Bobby Witt Jr. at my number four. I know MLB Network has him very, very low. I think he's number 9 on their
Yeah, which is
list.
disgusting.
It's pretty wild. So with Bobby Witt Jr., why I have him ranked as high as he is, he had the third most F4 among shortstops last year. And from July on, he led shortstops in F4 and had the sixth most in MLB at any position, which is very, very impressive. And from July on, he hit 310 with a 929 OPS and stole 26 bases in 77 games. So yeah, I mean, he was, according to F4, the sixth best player in baseball from July on, albeit that is 3 months. So with Bobby Witt Jr., part of why I may hesitate to put him higher is I feel a little bit weird about his defense. Like if you just look at outs above average, he made a dramatic improvement, but I don't know if that's going to sustain itself because it was a 25 out jump. He went from negative 11 outs above average to plus 14 from 2022 to 2023, but defensive runs saved had him as a negative. They had him at -6. So that's a 20 out slash run difference. According to, outs above average and defensive runs saved. So I'm curious, like, I think 2024 is going to clear up some questions with his defense for me. I feel like those numbers are not going to be as different. So if he is at that plus 14 level that outs above average has Matt, I think he is easily one of the best shortstops in the game. Just have to make sure that sustains itself before I put him any higher. So yeah, Bobby Witt Jr. is my number 4. Who do you have as your number 4?
My number four, I have a guy that, unlike Trey Turner, was absolutely phenomenal in the first year of his big contract. Talking about Dansby Swanson, who put up an excellent season for the Cubs, a 4.9 Fangraphs wins above replacement. He had a random defensive jump in 2022, and I think a lot of people were figuring, all right, contract year, fluke. And no, he did the exact same thing in 2023. He put up 20.3 defensive runs above average. He put up 19 outs above average, which was, I think, like the second most behind Brenton Doyle in the entire major leagues, or something like that. So, I mean, an absolutely phenomenal defensive season from Dansby Swanson. And in terms of offense, I mean, I think the funny thing about him is like he might be the most average guy offensively in terms of batted ball profile. The MLB average ground ball rate is 44.6%. His last year was 44.1%. The average fly ball rate is 23.5%. His was 25.2%. The average line drive rate is 24.9%. His was 24.2%. And the average pop fly rate is 7%. His was 6.5%. So he's very average on the batted ball metrics. The thing about playing in Wrigley is I don't really know like what you're supposed to do in terms of where you hit the ball because if you pull it or if you go to the opposite field, there's that random deeper part of the wall in both left and right, and obviously you never want to go straight away. But Dansby did pull the ball over 4% more last year than he did in 2022, and it resulted in some high expected slugging numbers compared to where he actually was. But in expected batting average, he was pretty similar. Um, in terms of striking out, he did do that quite a bit, but he actually does that. He's kind of always been a high strikeout guy. He did walk a lot more last year than he has in the past, which I like. But overall, I mean, he's been somewhat average offensively throughout much of his career, but he's been a standout defensively, and he's also been a very consistent standout on the bases, at least 3 BSR in every season, including 2020, since 2018. So I have Dansby Swanson in my four.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Wrigley can be pretty weird, and it's good for hitters to hit it in that blurred line of like pulled slash straight away, like that left center field, right center
Yeah,
field, because some of those might be considered straight away, which is actually like, okay, it might be good to hit it straight away here because that's technical. It's like 368 to left center, which is like very, very short. There's a lot of there were a couple home runs that we watched where it was like home run in 1 out of 30 ballparks, and that one ballpark is Wrigley Field. So yeah, the it's a 110-year-old ballpark now, so
yeah.
things can get pretty weird. But Dansby Swanson is my number 3 on this list. Just a lot of it is partially due to track record, and like that 2023 kind of confirmed like, okay, this guy is a really, really good shortstop. I was actually kind of critical um of fans being angry that the Red Sox didn't get Dansby Swanson, because I thought that was kind of a fluke year in 2022, but he ended up getting another 4-win season, almost 5-win season this past year. And in the last 2 seasons, he leads all players in defensive runs above average and outs above average, and also has a 106 OPS plus and a 56% extra base taken rate. That's pretty phenomenal. That's 14 percentage points above the 2023 MLB league average. That leads to him having the second most F4 among shortstops since 2022. So yeah, I think he's been a phenomenal defender, while being an above average hitter and very, very good base runner. And I think, with him doing it 2 years in a row, that proves to me he is one of the best shortstops in the game, and someone to keep an eye on moving forward. So yeah, now who is your number 3?
And number three, um, this might be a hot take. It was certainly a hot take from me because I fully expected to have this guy in the two. I'm going with Francisco Lindor in my three. I came into this episode fully prepared to put him in the two, and I ended up putting him in the three, not as any indictment on him, but just because of how impressed I am by the person I ended up putting in my two, and I'm sure you can probably guess who that is. Um, but Francisco Lindor is, I think, very disrespected in general. I mean, I think he took a lot of heat in the first few months of his Mets tenure, and no one has really recognized what he's been since then. He's put up back-to-back 6-win seasons, playing in New York. He's been pretty much what they asked for offensively, a 120 OPS, weighted runs created plus in both seasons, elite defense. And last year he had by far, in fact, the last 2 years, he's arguably had his two best base running seasons, his first and third best in BSR. Um, so he's just been, I mean, absolutely tremendous. As far as last year, there were a couple slight concerns. He is popping the ball up a lot more since 2021, or since 2020, I guess. His pop-up rate has gone from 4.6% to 10.4%, and it's gone up about 2% every year. He did have a lot more fly balls last year, which is good because he also had a jump in exit velocity, although he did also have a career high in strikeout rate, which granted it's only 19.9%, which is still not a lot, but it is still a career high. Um, but yeah, I mean, I do think Lindor takes a lot of heat that maybe he doesn't deserve playing in the New York market, but I think he handles it extremely well. And I think he goes out there and plays like the guy, I mean, this time last year when Ahmed Rosario and Andres Jimenez are both part of the youth movement that led Cleveland to the playoffs. There were conversations about, did Cleveland win this trade? Did the Mets, give up too much to get this guy? We're not having those conversations anymore. Anyone who tries to even entertain those conversations is a lunatic nowadays, right? Rosario's off the team. Jimenez, regressed a lot last year, and Lindor put up the same season that he did in 2022. So I have him in my three. He could be number one at many other positions given his talent. But I do think there are two shortstops better than him as of right now, going into 2024.
Right. So yeah, that that opens the door for me to talk about Francisco Lindor a little bit more. I have him as my number 2, and I think gap between number one and number two is not as far as like the offensive numbers would suggest. Like obviously the guy above Francisco Lindor had one of the greatest, one of the best offensive seasons in baseball last year. But like Francisco Lindor, what makes him so exceptional is how awesome he is at every part of the game. So just overall in the last two seasons, he has a 122 OPS plus and the most FWAR among shortstops. And along with that, and why I talk about why he's awesome in every part of the game is over these last 2 years, he's top 5 among shortstops in batting run value, base running runs, and defensive runs above average. There's no part of his game that really is weak. There's nothing that's really penetrable. So that's what kind of makes him as great as he is. And he's just been very, very consistent as well. Even his down years have been very, very good years. And in 2023 alone, he had increases in average exit velocity, barrel rate, sweet spot rate, fly ball rate, and line drive rate. And yeah, so that's why I really like him for 2023. And also what I may have against him a little bit is, according to outs above average, his defense has been declining. He's gone from, a great like Gold Glove contender to, albeit a very good but not as great defender. It's gone from, I think, 21 to 12 to 6 is where his outs above average is. Although I really like, I really like his game because he is so good at every part of the game. And there's nothing you can really complain about when it comes to Francisco Lindor. Yeah, now on to your number 2.
Yeah, so my number 2, this is in fact where I put Bobby Witt Jr. You had him understandably in your 4. And I was expecting to have him in my 3 when I came in. But I looked as much as I could at everything, and I decided to pull the trigger and put him up there in the in the 2. I think what we saw out of him from July on is a lot closer to who he is than the way he played before July of last year. From July 28th to the end of the season, Bobby Witt Jr. slashed 323, 369, 598 for a 156 weighted runs created plus. And with elite defense, he had a 3.3 FWAR. That tied him for 4th most in the majors, behind only Mookie Betts, Ronald Acuna Jr., and Matt Olson, all of which were MVP candidates last season. Not to mention he plays elite defense, like I said, at shortstop. He is perhaps the best base runner in the league, or at least a top 5 base runner in the league. He has 100th percentile sprint speed. He had 100th percentile base running run value last year, and he had 7 BSR. In fact, he has 13.8 BSR in just the first 2 years of his career. I know you mentioned the defense and the way it's swayed from 2022 to 23. I do think 2023 is closer to who he is. I think he's one of those guys where, he's still only going into his age 23 season, right? Like you and I think are both older than Bobby Witt Jr., or at least I definitely am. I was a senior in high school when he was a senior in high school, and I remember watching a video that like MLB Network did with him before the draft. And that wasn't that long ago at this point. So he took some time to adjust, but I feel like he's there now. The one thing that he really struggled to do before July of this year was hit fastballs, right? He hit 227 with a 402 slugging percentage against four-seam fastballs in 2022. And overall this year, he hit 262 with a 524 slugging, which is pretty good, but definitely there's a lot better. From July 28th on, like I mentioned, he hit 317 and slugged 698 against four-seam fastballs. So I feel like there's a lot of improvement coming with Bobby Witt Jr. this year. I think he's going to be an MVP candidate coming into this season. And I think that this is going to be the true breakout of Bobby Witt Jr. coming in 2024. And I have him in my 2.
Yeah. It's a good Bobby Witt Jr. little campaign speech there. I think you're almost selling me there. Like that was very well put
Listen,
together.
like I said, I came into this episode ready to put him in the 3 behind Lindor. And like I said, I did put Lindor in the 3, and that is not a knock on him. I was just so impressed with my research on Bobby Witt Jr. that I kind of talked myself into it.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, now on to the number 1 shortstop. I imagine we both have him here, but yeah, it's Corey Seager. And yeah, a lot of this just has to do with a crazy jump in production and how awesome he was last year. Most of these guys on the list, I'm judging on a 2-year scale. And I kind of am with Corey Seager as well, but there's just a lot of reasons to suggest why he's going to continue his excellence from 2023 to 2024. So yeah, last year he was second among all hitters in slugging and OPS, and he was 98th or 99th percentile in all expected categories. He had 18 more batting run value than the next best shortstop, according to Fangraphs, and he was also positive in outs above average and defensive runs saved. Only thing you can really complain about is the base running. I think that was maybe a little bit of an outlying season. I don't know what was going on there. He did have a hamstring issue. I'm hoping that's not necessarily going to linger, but it obviously didn't have any effect on his hitting, as he had I think it was a 10-13 OPS or something like that. OPS plus in the either upper 160s or low 170s, and was so much better than the next best hitting shortstop that I have to put him as my number one. And yeah, I mean, the underlying stuff just matches up. His average exit velocity and barrel rate were also astounding. Like, it was very comparative to the Shohei Otanis and Aaron Judges of the world, which obviously puts you very, very in a very, very high regard. So yeah, who's your number one?
Yeah, I mean, my number one, of course, is also Corey Seager. You know, in the age of guys like Shohei Ohtani and Aaron Judge with the run he went on in 2022, he had one of those in a normal year he would have won MVP type seasons. People said it with Vlad Jr. in 2021, and I feel like Corey Seager had one of those in 2023, even with some missed time due to injury. He still put up a 169 weighted runs created plus, like you mentioned, a 10-13 OPS. And it really felt like the season that we've been waiting for Corey Seager to have for years now, because he's had some excellent offensive spurts in otherwise injury-riddled seasons. You could point to a 149. Well, wasn't an injury-riddled season, but you could point to a 149 weighted runs created plus in 2020. You could point to his 146 weighted runs created plus in 2021, heading into his contract. To a degree, you could even point to his 175 weighted runs created plus in 2015, where he was a September call up. We've all, I felt like we've all been waiting for the season where Corey Seager puts it all together. He keeps up this offensive pace and he's able to stay on the field for most of the season. And he stayed on the field enough to qualify. Right, he played 119 games, had 536 plate appearances, which is not necessarily a full season, but it is enough to qualify for the batting title. And like you mentioned, all of the batted ball metrics, it lines up a 93.3 mile per hour average exit velocity, the highest in any season throughout his career, a 38% sweet spot rate, which is elite, right? Good enough for 89th percentile. He hits the ball hard. He lifts it at a good rate, a 29% fly ball rate in Texas, especially is good, a 27% line drive rate. He also just hits every pitch so well. How about a 306 average and a 619 slug on four-seam fastballs with even better expected numbers. And then going into run value per 100, 2.7 against sliders, 2.7 against changeups, 2.7 against sinkers, 4.7 against curveballs, 3.7 against cutters. You can't really beat this guy with anything. He hits in every location. He hits every pitch type. He is one of the most consistent hitters throughout the league. And like I said, you can't beat him on anything. He only strikes out 16.4% of the time. That's what he did last year. And he's lived under 20% and in many seasons under 15% or around the 15% marker in strikeout rate for every season. He's been in the top 10% of the league in expected slugging every year since 2020. Same with expected batting average. Same with expected WOBA. And yeah, we finally got to see it all put together last season. And I feel like we've been waiting to say this for a few years, but Corey Seager is the number one shortstop in baseball.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. With the batted ball metrics as good as they were, like, it, as I said, it's comparative to Judge, Ohtani, Yordan Alvarez, and that's while being a positive defender at the shortstop position. That's
Yeah.
pretty unbelievable. And to go with that, like, if you I calculated it yesterday. Like his F4 over 650 plate appearances would have been 7.4, which is an excellent, obviously MVP caliber season. And he has had his injury history, but part of that has just been bad luck. Like in 2021, he was out because he got hit on the wrist with a fastball, and that took him out for I think like 6 weeks or something like that. In 20 in last year, like he did have a hamstring issue, but part of his IL time was with a thumb injury, which I think had to do with him getting hit or something to do with a foul ball. So that's not something that's necessarily supposed to linger. It's just a weird, injury that comes with getting hit or whatever. So I don't think that injury history is necessarily something that we have to worry about as much as we do with like Mike Trout or like obviously Jacob deGrom when he was when he was on the field. Like with Corey Seager, I think that we can rely on him to go out and play 130 games this year. That's not something I would have a problem betting on. So yeah, I expect more things. Maybe even he could get that home run total to 40 this year. Like there's a lot to be excited about with Corey Seager. But yeah, that shall do it for the rankings. Now we will get into the 10 through 1 of the list. Do you want to go over your 10 through 1 for the shortstop position?
Yeah, I would love to. So at 10, I put JP Crawford. By the way, I was very close to putting Jackson Holiday at the 10,
Oh
or even
yeah.
the 9. He was my 11 though. Yeah, but Jackson Holiday, very excited for. Number 10, I have JP Crawford. Number 9, I have Willie Adames. Number 8, Carlos Correa. Number 7, Xander Bogaerts. Number 6, Bo Bichette. Number 5, Trey Turner. Number 4, Dansby Swanson. Number 3, Francisco Lindor. Number 2, Bobby Witt Jr. And number 1, Corey Seager.
Right. Yeah. Like first base, the same 10, but in fairly different orders this
Yeah.
time around. I think we may
Yeah,
have had like
we did have quite a lot of discrepancies in the order. I think the only ones we agreed on were 1 and 9.
um
Yeah.
yeah, that's correct.
Wow.
So yeah, my number 10 was Carlos Correa, number 9 was Willie Adames, 8 JP Crawford, 7 Bo Bichette, 6 Trey Turner, 5 Xander Bogaerts, 4 Bobby Witt Jr., 3 Dansby Swanson, 2 Francisco Lindor, and 1 Corey Seager. All right, so yeah, that shall do it for this week's positional rankings and this edition of Above Replacement Radio.